Welcome to episode 3 of our podcast. We're going to be covering demystifying digital ID standards for the property sector. It's quite an in-depth, exciting topic.
Yeah.
So my name's Ree from Credas. I'm the Partnerships Director. I've also got David here from Andrews Property Group.
Hi there.
And John, our Compliance Manager. Thank you ever so much again for your time today, both. I really appreciate it.
Very happy to be here.
So demystifying digital ID, topic and a half. There's standards that we need to look at, acronyms as well. I think there's a lot. So cryptographic checks, biometric checks. There's quite a lot of words in there that are not in everyone's normal vocabulary, let's say. But I want to talk about sort of the difference between the digital ID standards and the manual standards, from a compliance point, obviously, John, but also from a day-to-day as well, and how Andrews actually sort of work through that and deal with them. So I suppose we'll start with, when we say digital ID standards in the property sector, what does it actually mean? And what doesn't it mean?
That is a really good question. And, when you start talking about standards, something like Good Practice Guide 45 or Land Reg's Safe Harbour, those are defined standards. They've been set by the government. There's specific criteria that that people need to adhere to meet those standards. With digital ID, we've got the Digital Identity and Attributes Trust Framework, and that's a framework that shows what DVS providers should be doing and what they need to do around being a DVS provider. In terms of, there being a tool to implement these checks and to make sure to assist regulated firms and relying parties in discharging their regulatory obligations, something like Credas acts as a tool to help people do that. But we don't actually define the criteria and standards that need to be met. We offer it all there, and then it's dependent on the organisation's interpretation of the regs again and their own policies, controls and procedures to then use that tool to achieve a standard that they are satisfied with.
And I suppose from on the ground, people's boots on the ground, what does the digital ID standard mean for Andrews?
Yeah, again, you touch on there that the word that comes through this is interpretation, and it's now we suffer with. So again, because that's where we bring in differences. We rely on Credas largely for part of that journey, which is great. But then we're left to interpret, what is right and what's wrong. So that continues. That's a thread that we battle with daily.
Yeah, and going back to what you said, John, so you've got sort of the standards that are set out by various different organisations, and there are a lot, and then you've also got the tool. So, how do they work together? What are the differences between the standards and the tools that are out there to help the property sector?
Yeah, it's a case of achieving the standards that are set out, and you will use the tool to do that. But there's not it wouldn't be appropriate for Credas to dictate what a regulated firm can and can't do. And again, it's going to be subject to their own risk appetites and their own controls and procedures that they have in place. I mean, you've got mortgage brokers and conveyancers that need to adhere to the UK FML handbook, for example, whereas estate agents wouldn't need to in the same way. And that puts different requirements, for example, on verifying the identity of gifters, which adds a whole nother layer of identity checks for you to do, which I'm sure you enjoy, all those gifted deposits. But yeah, again, what we're hoping for, and I think what DSIT and HM Treasury are looking to achieve with their new guidance that's coming out, and indeed the legislation and the regulations in general, is to try and provide a standard and more of a framework for DVS providers to deliver their services to, and to give consumers more confidence in what's okay, what they can use and what they can't. And I think 2026 we'll see a lot more of that come out.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But when we talk about proper digital identity and the standards that us in the property sector have to meet, what are the sort of core elements and ingredients of that?
Well, you look at GPG 45, Good Practice Guide 45, and that does go some way to setting out really what a good DVS check would look like, okay? So you're checking the document, you're needing to do liveness checks in the first place to make sure that there's a real person there. You do biometric checks, and that, proves the facial analysis and all of that. There's cryptographic checks into the actual authenticity of the document, and document verification is very important to it. Equally, you've got to show activity there, so address validation, checking credit headers in the electoral roll to show that, it's not just a bit of paper showing that somebody lives at an address. You've actually got activity there showing that they have been present and it is a residence. So those are the key components, really, that build a good identity check.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about fraud, and those paper documents, your utility bills and your phone bills and whatever, are quite easily, manipulated, shall we say. So I suppose, doing those digital address checks are a more robust way of doing that. And you mentioned the liveness check. So if you're verifying someone remotely, you haven't met them or they've not come in the office with their documents, making sure that that person was live and present when they're capturing their ID document, and the biometric, so the face fits the face as well. It's all complex stuff, isn't it, for the property sector to get their minds around?
Fraud's a complex thing, and it's not so difficult for someone to hold up a picture of somebody when they're doing an IDV check. So the liveness is a really important feature to it.
Yeah, and you mentioned sort of standards. I mean, there is a standard in the property sector, the safe harbour standard. How clear are sort of the requirements under that sector?
Yeah,
that standard, the safe harbour standard.
Yeah. I think the safe harbour standard is relatively clear to conveyancers, and it's certainly helped. It's set out defined criteria that Land Registry will accept, and in turn they'll indemnify them for any recourse that might come from a false registration or from somebody committing identity fraud. So it's helped ring-fence that aspect of the compliance journey in verifying identity and add reassurance there, and it's very much geared around digital verification services.
Yeah.
So what we're starting to see now in 2026 is the government really advocating for digital verification services and recognising that it is a more secure, safe way to verify identity. And Land Reg have really just standardised that by offering safe harbour.
Yeah. And talking about sort of conveyancing risk then, so we know the safe harbour standard has standardised the process, but is it a regulatory thing? Is it law, or is it just a recommendation? Do conveyancers have to have safe harbour?
No, they don't, and a lot of conveyancers, you've still got conveyancers out there who are relying on paper certifications and ID. It's only about 60% of the industry that are using digital verification services. So it's one that's open to use. Insurers like it, and it's a good factor to mitigate risks of fraud and for any comeuppance that will come from that. But it's a mixed bag. There are complications with using safe harbour. You still have to have the paper utility bill, and that still needs to be certified by a regulated person, and that's something that digital verification services can't replace. So you're looking at a mix there to achieve the safe harbour standard,
which is the same across the board. When we talk about AML, it's not just about the ID verification part of it, and it's the checks, it's the risk assessment, and everything else that goes with it as well. The ID part is just one part of the puzzle. But I suppose from an estate agency point of view, you guys don't have a safe harbour or don't have a standard, and I suppose that gives your staff and your clients a real sort of confusion.
Yeah, and it starts before that. It starts with us, because we've got to interpret what we're going to decide is the right standard to move forwards with. And from our customers' perspective, they may well be met with a different request to someone else. Yeah. And that's confusing. And it's not just the consumer.
It's not just from a conveyancer to an agent. Different agents will do different things, won't they?
Absolutely.
Some might not do anything.
I'm not here to brand names, but I think that is a problem. And I think when we talk about the journey a customer goes through, whether or not it's ourselves, the conveyancer, it's the mortgage, and they're being asked the same thing, but they're actually being asked different things through those three journeys, and it'd be great to clear that up. So there's a real positive part for us from a digital piece. Particularly you touched on people that might live out the area, and for us to be able to now get through that process without the drive to the solicitor's office to go through ID is good. You touched on the different elements as well. One of the big challenges we have is around proof of funds. And that's generally where clients almost show more concern because it's showing their financial income piece. So we get a lot of challenge on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like showing anyone my bank statement, so I think it's really sort of intrusive, but you need it, don't you? You need to show where that revenue and that wealth or source of the funds have actually come from to buy a property, and it's really important because that's when we talk about money laundering. The criminals clean this money, don't they? And by doing that, it goes into an account somewhere and they're trying to clean it and put it through the property transaction. So, yeah, do you think having a standard for agents would be helpful?
Massively, and not just for us, the customer. So yeah, if there is a clear standard, and I think it would be nice to have a clear standard through all parts of that housing sector, then that's good for us. We know what we have to sign up to. It's all very transparent, and the customer ultimately knows what they're signing up to. So we'll be right behind that.
I think from a consumer point of view, if there was a standardised digital ID process, or any ID process or AML process in the agent world, then as a consumer you could signpost them to that government's standard and say, well, this is why we need it. Whereas at the moment you can signpost them to that, but again it's a bit grey and you may need to do this and think about, and then the language is should, would, could. It's not helpful, really, is it?
No, and we've used tech. So when anti-money laundering first came in, when ID first came in as a request for agents to ask for it, you would send them to that link, and that answers that one question. Yes, you've got to go through this process, but it's where it becomes slightly harder is if it's a standard transaction, everything's quite easy to a point. When it becomes slightly different, that's when it falls apart. So there are no examples of what you have to do if it's this type of situation. So if we can answer that, then great. And I think the more we can send them to a link with very clear, definitive guidelines, absolutely, that's good for all of us.
Yeah, and I think it's needed in the sector because you mentioned previously consumers will ask questions about why do I need to do this, why have I got to provide my bank statements or link to my bank, or even down to why have I got to provide an ID document. We go to the pub together, David, you know me for 20 years. And it's just not good enough anymore, is it? But I think you mentioned something when we were speaking earlier today about how the landscape has changed over the years, and 10 years ago perhaps consumers wouldn't have had to have done this, and maybe that was the last time they bought or sold a house. So it's quite I think people are surprised sometimes when they're like, oh, I need to provide all of this documentation, and I suppose a standardised approach to it would help, and it would make sure that all agents, all conveyancers, have to adhere to the same regulations, I suppose. So David, going back to what you mentioned earlier about, the industry not having a standard, do you think it would be helpful to have a standard in the agent sector, or would it be more red tape, I suppose?
Yeah, we're all for red tape. But I think, no, it'd be great to have a standard, firstly for us to refer to, so we can set our processes out accordingly, but also somewhere to direct customers to as well. So it's transparent for them. We can share a link. They can see the information, and I think that will help them understand it. Yeah,
no, I agree. And again, from my point of view as the consumer that's recently gone through the process, having different agents ask for different things, and it almost makes you a bit sceptical. Well, why would Andrews need more information than the next, or vice versa? So I think it would be really handy for agents, especially one of your size with 380 staff. Everyone knows exactly what the standard is and what needs to happen. But from the consumer point of view, for you to be able to send me a link and say, this is why we need to do it, I think it would be really helpful, and it would build trust as well. I
think that we're human beings, so we naturally get drawn to the path of least resistance, and that's natural. But again, if we're all reading from the same script, then ultimately everyone should have the same answers.
I can see it from the other side as well, though. For regulators, it's really difficult to have this one-size-fits-all standard, and I think that's very much why the risk-based approach comes into play and why that's mandated, for central professionals to follow, because each transaction's different, each profile of a customer is different. You might need to do different degrees of due diligence on each. And I think the risk-based approach is the best way of capturing that, but also it prevents that standardized, this is the blueprint of how you verify ID and can be satisfied that you're mitigating risks of fraud.
Yeah, and I think we talked about earlier about how you said, and exactly what you said, and if the transaction's simple, someone buying their first house and their deposit has come from a salary that they've been saving for the last however many years, those are the easy ones that we could apply a standard to. But then if the transaction's complex, maybe it's a company that's owned by another company, and then that's an offshore company, and where's this come from, where's that come from? I suppose that's quite hard to standardise. And that's where the difficulty is as well. And also, I suppose, how much sits with the agent instead of the conveyancer. I think there's a grey area there as well, isn't there?
And that's you touched on that, which is quite interesting, because we often get feedback from customers. I thought this was the solicitor's job, and there's a bit of surprise that we're asking for that at often the earliest part of the transaction. I'm thinking of selling my house. I'll get the estate agent round. Yep, in order to go forward, you need to provide your ID. And that can sometimes be a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we've said this over and over again, what we're trying to do and what standards are trying to do is simplify the whole process for everyone and decrease the amount of time it takes, while still fighting that financial crime and that impact that it has on people's daily lives. So, I think we are angels in disguise as well. But why would or should getting a digital identity standard matter right now? Like, what impact would that have on our sector, in the property sector? So, yeah, what impact would it have, and why should we be pushing the government for that?
For me, it will add to speed. Because if the customer knows what they need to provide at the beginning, that's a good thing. And for us, if we know, then great. And you can streamline your processes towards that. So I think all of that will help speed up the process. It will help speed up the time to get properties to market, which ultimately speeds up the time to sell them. So we'll be in favour of that. So that for me would be the biggest ticket. But also transparency, so that everyone's kind of aligned with what we are trying to achieve through this.
Yeah. And what about from a compliance point of view, John? Why does it matter?
Yeah, digital verification services, we're living in a digital age, okay? And, you're looking at requirements that involve verifying identity on numerous occasions, where we can streamline and ring-fence that process with secure digital systems on secure databases, and you've not got bits of paper or emails flying around with identity documents on them, and that's a win, right? And we're all looking for wins here in this process, and ways that we can use technology to support the regulations and to make the regulations more effective. And I think what we're going to see now is a real coming together of that, and it's legislators and the regulators linking up with DVS providers and getting buy-in from them about what they can contribute to the process, in order to make a safer, secure and quicker journey for everyone.
Yeah.
I think, you touched on security of data there as well. And I think, we talked about paper files. Yeah. And it's difficult to believe that a small legal firm completes a transaction, stores the file somewhere, and someone's going back to that file in 7 years' time to take the ID out to remove it. That's not happening. So this will certainly help to control that.
You just reminded me, actually, of the first time I stepped into a law firm, which was probably about 20 years ago, and I saw behind the scenes, and they've got these big roller filing cabinets, floor to ceiling, multiple boxes, with everyone's data in it. And I didn't actually think, it's not as if someone's going to go, we ID'd Reed 7 years ago to the date, let's go and destroy that paper document. And they're storing it, relatively securely, I suppose, if it's all in, a secure building. But with regards to agents, they don't have that mechanism either, do they? So where does that piece of paper end up? So, digitalising it is certainly going to make it more secure for everyone. But for me, again, going back to my experience, it's about not having to verify my ID. It's the buying agent, the selling agent, the conveyancer, the broker, the lender, taking those days off work to do that if they don't accept digital ID. So I'm just looking forward to a space where, you know, it's accepted across the board. The standards are clear, and from a consumer point of view, that'll speed up me having to verify my ID. From an agent point of view, you know, it's going to speed up your process to getting the property on the market and selling it. And then I suppose from a compliance point of view, if everyone's adhering to the same rules and regs, then, you know, we're all in a good place then, aren't we?
Sounds easy, doesn't it?
And if you
I know. I wish.
if you've got that standard, you know, really, that can kind of be created itself by verifying an identity properly and in accordance with the requirements. You know, and then it's reusable, so they're not having to repeat that journey and complete the checks over and over again. You're looking at another real big win there for the whole process, and yeah.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for today, guys. You've been really
You're very
great.
welcome.
Super appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ree. Cheers.